Buenas noches y bienvenidos a Opinión Pública. Soy Pachi Valencia desde Washington, D.C. Espero que estén teniendo un excelente inicio de semana. La reciente elección de noviembre dejó interrogantes sobre el futuro político del país y en especial sobre las estrategias que los partidos están empleando para conectar con nuestra comunidad hispana. Los hispanos, como sabemos, somos una fuerza electoral clave y diversa y tenemos un impacto significativo en estados como Arizona, Nevada y Florida. Y ahora, con la llegada de una nueva administración liderada por el expresidente Donald J. Trump, el panorama se redefine. Esto nos lleva a preguntarnos qué puede hacer el Partido Demócrata para fortalecer su relación con los votantes hispanos y reconectar de manera más efectiva. Para ayudarnos a analizar estos desafíos y explorar posibles estrategias que podría llevar a cabo el Partido Demócrata, nos acompaña Denny Salas, estratega político y cofundador de Gotham Polling Analytics. Denny Salas, political strategist and co-founder at Gotham Polling Analytics. Thank you for joining Opinión Pública.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. So, Denny, let me start by asking, what's your overall assessment of what went wrong for Democrats in the November election, particularly with the Latino community? What messages do you think failed to resonate with Hispanics?
That's a great question. Look, I think there was two really big issues that the Democrats failed to convey, or I would say two messages that they failed to convey to the Latino population, but even the American population as a whole. One being it's the economy, stupid, right? That James Carville line that was echoed 30 years ago is always important. And with the Latino community, it is about climbing the socioeconomic ladder so they can achieve the American dream. So they failed to just do that and not really care about trying to make things cheaper for the average Latino worker in this country. So obviously we saw the increased rise in inflation that really harmed the purchasing power of Latino families. But what they didn't do was try to pass any policies to cut taxes or make things cheaper for them. The other thing that they failed at, which I always say is you should never support something that does harm to the average American. So basically do no harm. And what I mean by that is you shouldn't pass any laws or enact any sort of policy or regulation that's going to lead to an innocent person being hurt. Now, there's multiple ways that it can be hurt, like an individual or an innocent American can be hurt, or even a Latino family can be hurt. But one of those things where, we talk about immigration, Latino families were very much in support of stronger border policies. And the reason why is because a lot of them came here legally. They fought for it. They're here and they're they're doing everything right. But then they see people that are skipping the lines, and then all of a sudden they get castigated and they get stereotyped in a certain way, when all of a sudden you see an illegal immigrant come to this country and then all of a sudden harm an innocent American. So they do not like feeling the blowback and all of a sudden being felt like they're not American because somebody else came in that may look like them or maybe from the same country as them and then did something bad. So I think those are the two main things that the Democrats failed to do. One, make life cheaper, and number two, do no harm. Those are the two main things they failed at. Mm-hmm.
And after the November elections, we saw some data that, for example, the Republican Party increased its outreach to Latino voters, particularly in key battleground states. So what strategies do you believe Democrats need to adopt to compete for this growing electorate?
It's a great question. I'll be honest, I'm currently working on an op-ed where I actually piggyback off my daughter's 2 years old. I have a 2-year-old daughter and a 6-month-old son, and we listen to all the nursery rhymes. And, I think of Old MacDonald, E-I-E-I-O, right? Now, part of my op-ed is basically setting this agenda based on the Old MacDonald song, and it's basically calling it Going Back to the Farm. The economy. They need to focus on the economy to not only, one, make life cheaper for Latino families and the average American, but also increase economic opportunity. So one of the backlashes and the reason why the Trump administration, or excuse me, President Trump, elect Trump, was successful in winning re-election is because he focused on actually bringing back jobs into America. And you know that that was the number one issue that he focused on, and also making cost of living cheaper. So Democrats need to focus on the economy. Two, they need to focus on EI. They need to focus on infrastructure. And what I mean by that is, like, yes, the President Biden already passed a big infrastructure bill, but that bill itself really focused on trying to increase subsidies for the green economy. It didn't focus a lot on trying to rebuild a lot of these roads and bridges, but additionally didn't focus on one of the things that really matters for Latino families, and that is getting a great education. So rebuilding some of these old schools. The average age for a school in the United States of America is 50 years old. The average age in New York City is 70 years old. And there's so many studies and so much information out there that tells you that if you do something like increase the amount of sunlight that comes into a school, that all of a sudden students start performing around 30% better. So when you're talking about infrastructure, I really want to focus on something like actually modernizing and rebuilding a lot of our school buildings. So then, which is important, as we all know, education is a big issue for Latino families, and infrastructure and rebuilding those schools goes right into my next thing, E next, which is education. You know, one of the things that we've seen is, especially for the last 30 years, is exponential rise in public taxpayer funds going into our public schools with no discernible improvements on educational outcomes. So we spent so much more money on actually per pupil funding, so the amount of money that students are getting into these schools, and yet the school outcomes are not actually getting better, meaning that our students aren't learning anything or actually doing better than they should have been doing about 20, 30 years ago. So what does that look like? We need to focus on education and accountability and transparency. We need to hold teachers' feet to the fire so they're actually performing better. We've seen it here in New York City, for example. Right now I'm taking a trip in Florida, but I live in New York City, so so just so I should clarify that. But in New York City, we've seen schools like charter schools in New York State. They have to go through a tough, rigorous reauthorization process every 5 years, which means that they have to hit these really tough performance standards before they can get it reauthorized and the school doesn't shut down. You do that and implement those type of policies to our public schools, that means that we are actually showing these average Latino families and average Americans that we actually care about the performance of our schools. So we need to focus on immigration, on education to actually improve educational outcomes for a lot of these families. Now, mention Old McDonald, EI. Second I would say is like, look, we have to eliminate identity politics. One of the failures of the Democratic Party was focusing on identity politics for the last 5 years, where instead of actually caring about making the average Latino families or American life better, what they did instead was to focus on identity politics, saying like, well, this person is failing because they look like this. I'm like, no, that's not true. They're failing because we're not focusing on all these other things that I just talked about. So, those issues, by the way, are all colorblind. So we need to eliminate identity politics as a whole. Now, there's no O, I'll be honest with you, on the old McDonald part, but those four things, EI, it's going to be the economy, infrastructure, education, and eliminating identity politics. Those are the biggest things that the Democratic Party can do now in order to improve going forward and actually win the voters' trust, especially Latino American families to trust going forward.
That's a very interesting perspective, because actually I was reading a recent op-ed by Chuck Rocha, a Hispanic Democratic Party strategist who worked on Senator Ruben Gallego's campaign. And actually he said that he withdrew his nomination to run for chair of the DNC because he wants to focus on grassroots efforts to, quote unquote, fix the party. So he said when he joined the party, I'm going to read you literally what he said. He said he wanted wanted to fight against exporting U.S. jobs overseas, to drain the Washington, D.C. swamp of rich, powerful people who think they are better than the rest of us, and to stop spending taxes on foreign wars when there are plenty of problems at home. And he also said that the party needs to return to the working class values. So do you think this feeling resonates with other Latino Democrats as well?
I do. I know that he is obviously repeating and regurgitating a lot of the Trump kind of Trumpian standards, especially like not getting involved in foreign wars and all those different things. I think what he's missing out on is that Latino families, it's true about the working class families. That's something that obviously Democrats completely forgot about. But it's what they do need to focus on is, like I mentioned, education, infrastructure, the economy, and also eliminating the identity politics. Because look, I'm first generation in this country. And my family, when we were trying to make it in America and trying to actually achieve the American dream, we knew that nothing was going to be given to us. All we wanted was a level playing field to ensure that we can actually prove ourselves and then become successful because we succeeded in the game that's existed. So that's all everybody wants is a level playing field and make sure that you're not getting discriminated or getting knocked down because of how you look like. And I think those values haven't changed in that work ethic with Latino families just trying to achieve the American dream. That hasn't gone anywhere. But the first things first, and we all know this as Latinos, especially the first generation coming to this country, the number one thing that we want for our families is a great education. Because we know that baseline, they receive that great education, they know that the world is open for them, that they can do anything that they want as long as they receive that great education. So yes, he can talk about some of the Trumpian standards like, focus on working class. Obviously, that's true. That's part of my strategy as well about Democrats can improve going forward. But, for worrying about the foreign wars, everything else like that, again, that doesn't matter as much because Latino families really care about what's going to make my life better today and right now.
And another data that came after the elections was how Republicans successfully made gains with Latino men, particularly on economic and public safety. So how should Democrats now address these topics to reclaim this demographic?
Look, I'm going to sound like a broken record, unfortunately, but look, it's the economy, right? It really is. It's going to be the economy. We know that. I remember when my dad was struggling just to make sure that we keep a roof over our heads when we were trying to work here. He wanted to make sure that his dollar, the amount of work that he's putting in, is able to feed the family, put clothes on our backs, and make sure we have a roof over our heads. That's what matters, is to make sure that and there's a little sense of machismo with Latino men where we feel like we actually have to be there and be the main breadwinner and ensure that we are taking care of our families. So anything that causes that stress to us is going to make us feel like we need to look somewhere else, look for support elsewhere. And that's what happened with the Democratic Party, where they felt, and I think justifiably, they felt that they were taken advantage of. And Latino men felt that you weren't caring about me being able to provide for my family. Instead, you were worried about they, them, pronouns, all these other issues.
Latinx.
That literally had nothing. Exactly. Latinx, exactly. The big one was that. And that, to me, you weren't all about that versus actually what matters to me and making sure I can take care of my family.
And as a strategist, what steps should Democrats in Congress take to work more effectively now with the incoming administration of President Donald J. Trump?
Look, I think have an open mind, all right? I'll give you a perfect example of something that Trump did for, let's say, black voters, all right? And for black collegiate Americans, so folks are going to historically black colleges and universities, so HBCUs. Every year before Trump became president, HBCUs would have to go up to Congress and start begging for annual funding in order for them to reach any sort of scholarship goals, anything else to actually rebuild the campuses, everything else, right? President Trump made that permanent funding in the budget. All right. So think about all the stories we hear from Democrats against, black Americans and everything else. Well, he made this funding that before then you had 8 years of President Obama. Before that, you had 8 years of George W. Bush. Before that, you had 8 years of President Clinton. and none of them made funding to HBCUs permanent. But then President Trump came in and he did. He's like, why are you coming up here annually in order to beg for money on this? It's already getting funded. No, we're just going to make it permanent. So all Democrats need to look at it from there. There's avenues where he will work with Democrats in order to actually help a lot of these communities, especially Latino families. So they have to have an open mind instead of being on the attack and try to say, hey, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. Guess what? The rest of America just told you that they don't think that. They believe that he actually can lead this country and actually make it better. So they need to accept those results and instead try to find avenues and how to work with them.
And now we're a little bit more than 1 month away from the presidential inauguration. How do you think, how are you testing the waters here now with, all the nomination things, these issues that are happening in Congress, between Congress and Trump? How do you foresee?
I think we know that he's prioritizing loyalty versus experience, right? Now, we know that for a fact. I believe that some picks, and especially the government efficiency or the Doge government agency, that's going to be Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Look, I think there are a lot of taxpayer waste that's going into a lot of the programs. There's no doubt about that. So I think targeting that's going to be good. There's some controversial picks that I feel that maybe too tough of a pill to swallow for Senate Republicans to confirm. 100%. And we're seeing some of that already played out. We've already seen it with Matt Gaetz, but we're also seeing it play out with Hesgeth for Secretary of Defense. And it doesn't seem like he's going to get that nomination. So a lot of this stuff is going to be determined by Senate Republicans who are going to hold the majority through the whole confirmation process. Now, Democrats, we'll see what. Some of them have been kind of biting their tongue now. Some of them have been obviously raising the alarm bells for a lot of these folks. Obviously RFK Jr., he's going to be an interesting one. I think you're going to see some Democrats that are likely going to support his nomination for HHS. So we'll see that, and we'll see how that's going to balance it out. So I think it's going to be mainly led by Senate Republicans, but Democrats are going to do what they're normally going to do. They're going to raise, hell, and trying to go against some of these picks. But at the same time, I think you're also going to see a lot of crossover from the aisle in order to support some of these untraditional picks. So I think we're seeing it play out now. You're not seeing that much, I would say, hesitancy. Well, the Hesgeth, you're seeing it. You're not really seeing it. Kennedy's an interesting one. Tulsi Gabbard, I think Democrats don't like her, generally. And so that's one of the things. So we'll see how that's going to end up going. But I think overall, it's going to be determined by the Senate Republicans, not so much the Democrats.
And when it comes to this work between the executive and the legislative, how do you think it's going to play out? Do you think it will still be like a fight for power, partisan issues?
It's interesting because right now, come January 6th, when both the new Congress official gets sworn in, so it's going to be the Senate and the House, it's going to be Republican Party, right? So they want a clean sweep. So they have the presidency, the Senate, and the House. The challenging part is going to be the House, where because Trump is pulling a number of these individual congressmen to serve in his administration, their cushion is going to be either not there or very close, and that majority for Mike Johnson. So at that point, he's going to have to deal and work with Hakeem Jeffries in order to actually pass any of Trump's priorities. So it's going to be interesting to see that. Now, what we have seen in the last couple of years, or say the last year since Mike Johnson has become the speaker after the whole Kevin McCarthy debacle, is that Hakeem Jeffries actually has worked very well with Mike Johnson. He has developed a great working relationship. They do not attack each other. They don't bash each other over the head. They don't play these juvenile games. They actually work very professionally with each other. And you've seen it. You've seen the Democrats all of a sudden come in and vote to support Mike Johnson when all of a sudden they had a motion to try to remove him from speakership after one government funding vote. So I think you're still going to see that. Now, that's going to create some opportunity for Democrats to get some of their policy priorities passed, which, naturally you're going to see that. So we'll see. I think that I expect, because we've already seen that from the House. The Senate is already set up that way, that you work with Democrats like all the time. So I don't think you're going to see so much of the animosity that we've seen previously. I think now Democrats recognize that, look, you're the party that's not in power. You have to do everything now in order to make yourself seem like you're actually trying to do stuff for the American people, and then try to reclaim the majority in 2 years. So.
And now with the 2024 elections behind us, what lessons can Democrats learn from Latino communities that could shape their strategy for the next election cycle, or even to win the Congress back in 2026?
I would say, look, old MacDonald had a farm. E-I-E-I. I will promise I go right back
That's
to that.
That's a very catchy bit for them.
It is. It is catchy, simple, but I think it lays out the actual priorities that the Democratic Party should follow. It is E-I-E-I. Obviously it doesn't really mean anything, but in this case, but E-I-E-I does. So it is focus on the economy, focus on infrastructure, focus on education, eliminate identity politics. You do those 4 things, they're going to be okay in the future elections.
All right, Denny Salas, anything else you'd like to share about this topic?
No, this is great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah.
All right, Denny Salas, political strategist and co-founder at Gotham Polling Analytics. Thank you for joining Opinión Pública. It was a pleasure.
That's it. Thank you for having me.
Ahora queremos saber su opinión. ¿Qué cree usted que necesitan los partidos políticos para ganar el apoyo de los votantes latinos? ¿Y cuáles son los temas que considera más importantes para nuestra comunidad? Déjenos sus comentarios debajo y únase a la conversación. Gracias por acompañarnos en Opinión Pública. Yo soy Pachi Valencia desde Washington, D.C. y nos vemos mañana con más temas que impactan a la comunidad hispana. Hasta pronto.